Well, welcome and good morning. I saw a couple of you guys at parties last night, so I'm impressed with the attendance this morning. Thanks for coming. Please join me in welcoming Managing Partner, Emerson Collective, and the former U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. Thank you. So last night, Arne, I was reflecting on the life of Barbara Bush as a citizen, as a first lady, and as a mother, and sending my best thoughts to the Bush family. And it reminded me of a conversation you and I had not so long ago about your mother and about how she raised you and about what she did with kids that didn't look anything like you. Can you share a little bit of that story?
And first, just quickly, obviously, Barbara Bush was just a remarkable person, and maybe we'll get into it later. I worry about the collapse of the middle. I worry about a lack of empathy, and she, I think, personified some of those values that as a country we're lacking now, so that's a real loss. But we grew up a little bit different, and when you're a kid, you don't know it's any different. It's just your reality, your life. I was born in '64. My sister was born in '67. My brother was born in '70. And in 1961, my mother started an inner-city tutoring program that was literally less than 2 miles from our house. We lived in middle-class, integrated Hyde Park. My dad taught at the University of Chicago. This was across the 47th Street sort of invisible barrier between Hyde Park and North Kenwood, Oakland. And she just raised all three of us literally all our lives, being a part of her after-school program. And so we were doing that long before we ever went to real school. And it had this formative impact. We've all tried to follow in her footsteps in various ways. We went almost every day growing up. I took a year off of college to work with her full-time and sort of figure out, was this who I was, or was this just a piece of who I was? And most of my friends were becoming investment bankers and lawyers and thought about that. But what we just saw all our life are kids who happened to be black, who happened to be poor, very few of whom had functional families, lots of gang violence, lots of issues we dealt with, crazy issues, go on to do extraordinary things because my mother and others were in their lives. And this one, not to go on too long, but her whole philosophy was older kids taught younger kids. So 10-year-olds taught 5-year-olds, 15-years-olds taught 10-year-olds. So the young man who taught me was totally standard for the neighborhood, never met his father. Mother was in and out of jail, raised by his grandmother. He went on to be an IBM fellow, first African Americans, all kinds of research patents. Kerry Holly, he taught me for like 15 years. He stayed with DePaul, went to law school, came worked every day. But by every outside stereotype, he'd be a kid, destined to not make it.
Right.
He's had this remarkable life because that was in him. That was in him. It wasn't any gift anyone gave him. That was in him. He just had an opportunity to bring those gifts to the forefront. So that's my driving passion. We've all stayed in education. We've all done this because we know what kids can do. Give them a chance. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was reflecting on Barbara Bush's life and, thinking, wow, America's really changed during her life. President Barack Obama made it to the highest level in the United States. But then I see the reports about Starbucks and the decision in May to close 8,000 stores to conduct racial bias training. Have we made progress?
That's a good question. I don't think I have the answer. Have we had... Yes, by any measure, we have made progress, but are we at the finish line? Are we where we need to be? We're not close, and I think you can make a pretty good argument that while it's amazing to have the first African-American president, obviously, beyond historic, in some ways we may be further behind today than we were at a different point. And whether you talk about racial bias and prejudice and stereotyping, whether you talk about, innocent black men being shot and killed by the police, whether you talk about our schools being more segregated today than in the 1960s, we have a huge amount of challenges that right now I don't know, I'll say I don't think we're beginning to address openly and honestly. And you can agree or disagree with what Starbucks is trying to do, but I'll just give Starbucks credit for trying.
Yeah.
Being in the game. And I think we all need to be in the game in different ways and do some things that make us uncomfortable and try and find ways to build bridges and heal these deep divides and wounds that that's who we are now. We're struggling. We're struggling as a country, and we have to deal with that openly and honestly.
So a lot of people probably don't know about what you're doing now since you left the Secretary of Education post. But I know you've been working with black youth between 17 and 24 years old, many of whom have been formerly incarcerated. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and how it's connected to your work in education?
Sure. I'll sort of actually take it back to growing up as a part of my mother's program. When I started to be about, actually my son's age now, 13, 14, 15, I started to play basketball all over the South and West Sides. And I had a bunch of guys who were older who sort of helped protect me and gave me safe passage to those courts and those neighborhoods. And as I got a little bit older in my teens, I started to lose friends to gun violence. And that, I'll just say it shapes you and I think honestly scars you in ways that are a little bit hard to talk about when you're a kid.
Yeah.
So this goes back 40 years now at this point. When I led the Chicago Public Schools for 7.5 years, lots of good issues, trying to raise academic achievement and budgets and labor management and construction. And candidly, those were all easy compared to dealing with gun violence in our city. And Jessie, during those 7.5 years, on average, we lost one of our students to gun violence every 2 weeks. It was just a devastating rate of loss. Nothing in this, not once in the schools, but just in their neighborhoods. And when my family and I moved to DC, very, very naively on my part, I thought we were at rock bottom. I thought things couldn't get worse. And for a whole host of reasons, things in Chicago got a lot worse over those 7 years. And just to quickly give you some, Chicago's just in a state of crisis now. It's the third largest city. It has way more homicides and shootings than New York and LA combined. Last year we had 660. I keep saying I just want us to be normal. I would love to have zero. Normal for us relative to population, relative to New York, we would have to go from 660 to 92. So we're that much of an anomaly. And the thing that's so brutal to me is that we just robbed kids in Chicago and South and West Sides of their childhoods. Kids can't go out and play. They're living with a level of fear and trauma that's unimaginable. There's a high school I helped start 20 years ago called North Lawndale College Prep, a charter school. I was actually there 2 days ago. Amazing school, great graduation rates, kids from North Lawndale on the west side going to college at amazing numbers. That one high school last year had 17 kids shot.
Oh my goodness.
17 students in one high school. And I've never been to Iraq, I've never been to Afghanistan, but I don't know if kids in actual war zones have that many kids who are dying. So, and then the final number I'll give you is that almost no crimes in Chicago are getting solved. There's something called the clear rate, which is a percent of crimes that where the police actually catch somebody. So if you kill someone in Chicago, that has a 26% clear rate. So 74% of homicides go unsolved. And if you just shoot someone and not kill them, that has about a 3 to 4% clear rate. So 96, 97% of shootings go unsolved. So we can say Black Lives Matter, but I promise you, if those 660 homicides looked more like me and less like you, we wouldn't be in this, close to this situation. So what we're trying to do, and it's interesting, I worked for government for 17 years, now you're outside government, you have different roles to play. Right. So we are hiring the young men, and unfortunately it's young men 17 to 24 who happen to be black, where 75% of the victims and the perpetrators and often the same person, people who are shot and shooting others. We're hiring them, they work with us for a year. We do all kinds of job training stuff. We do lots of social emotional support, trauma care. We've had a whole set of guys get high school diplomas. We had a couple started in college in January. And then we spin them off into the legal economy after a year. So we have about 36 employers who are hiring. We have guys working in culinary, hospitality, manufacturing, construction. We have 2 guys at a law firm. We have 1 guy working for Deloitte, which is amazing now. And basically just trying to give a transition from the illegal economy, which inevitably leads to violence, to the legal economy. The hope, and the reason why I'm actually very hopeful about where we can go is in every crisis there's an opportunity. The opportunity here in Chicago is it is so violent, it is so bad. Guys are tired, they're trying to get out, they're tired of running from the police, they're tired of getting shot. One of the young men we're working with has been shot 13 times. It's just sort of unimaginable. And there's always this myth that guys who are selling drugs are making a lot of money. The truth is very few guys are making money, in part because of the fracturing of the gangs, the decentralization. There's just smaller markets. And so we start guys at about $11 an hour. Half our guys, it's a pay cut, and they're willing to take that pay cut to do something that's different. For the other half, it's a pay increase. And one of our candidly worst shooters was making $80 a day on the street. So creating just extraordinary amount of havoc, really hurting the community for peanuts. And the fact that we as a society would much rather lock them up in Cook County for $55,000, $60,000 and not do a job and wraparound services for $25,000, $30,000, our values are totally backwards. So there's a massive opportunity. We have 7 cohorts of guys, South and West Side. We bring 20, 30 guys together, often from rival groups, and work through issues. We have a waiting list for every cohort, so we're trying to scale much faster. One of ours, we have 186 guys waiting, and those guys waiting are at extraordinary risk. So we have to scale faster and start to serve more guys. We're building street outreach teams and trying to move from sort of individual transformation to neighborhood violence suppression. That's how we're going to test ourselves as we go into the summer.
Is it easy to get corporate partners for this?
Companies have been much more supportive than I anticipated, so that's been very positive. And the truth is actually right now we have more jobs waiting on the back end than we have guys ready.
Is that right?
Which is amazing.
It is.
As we start to work with more guys, those numbers will swap. What I will say, so that part I'm beyond grateful and thankful. What I tell the employers is this can't be charity, this can't be philanthropy. You got to think this is definitely a different talent pool maybe than you're used to, but our guys are smart, they're resilient, they're talented. Many have been CEOs on the street, they know customer service, they know supply chains, they know all kinds of things. Right. And those skills are transferable. And these are guys who have been through hell and want to do something very different, are unbelievably motivated. So that part's been great. What I will say, Jessie, is that for me, I always say I'm trying to solve, I think, an economic problem, not a crime problem. Yeah. Every time someone gets shot, they put the poor police chief on the news and say, what are you doing about this? And for me, Eddie Johnson's a good guy. He can do something about it. Police have a role, and police, again, are candidly really struggling. Yeah. But we have to provide jobs. Mm-hmm. We have to provide guys. These are men, not boys. They have to eat. They have to pay rent. They have to take care of younger siblings. And if we're not willing to hire in mainstream economy, they are going to make money. It's just going to be on the streets that leads to violence. So it's a long way of saying corporate Chicago and corporate America has to start to hire. And what we're trying to do is take away their risk, mitigate their risk and give guys a chance to transition in.
You know, I've been inspired when looking at the young people in Parkland in the wake of the shooting there. And I've just been so inspired by these young people who are just so intentional and resilient. And I'm wondering, so I was looking at cable news and wondering what they had that I didn't in terms of citizenship and inspiration. And then I saw you. There was a big student walkout day, and there's Arne Duncan on TV talking about the walkout. You were so proximate to this work. How are you involved with this gun control with kids?
Yeah, so this is a heavy conversation for 8 o'clock in the morning.
We're going to bring it up toward the end, I promise.
Try and think of something lighter. So let me back up. A couple just interesting paths or stories of how we got here. And I've said this publicly, President Obama said this publicly. He obviously for 8 years dealt with the worst challenges literally on the planet. But his worst day in office and my worst day was the day of the Sandy Hook massacre. And I'll back it up some more. And this is a hard thing to say publicly, but I'll say it, that when I was leading Chicago public schools and we were having a kid killed every 2 weeks, what I honestly believed was that America didn't care about black and brown kids. That as long as black and brown kids are being killed, that was okay. I never said this part publicly, but I always thought it would take white kids being killed for anything to change. I obviously never anticipated Sandy Hook. I never anticipated 20 white babies and 5 teachers and a principal. The president went down the next day. The vice president and I went down like 2 days after, and spending time with those families, it's unimaginable. I've stayed close with a couple of the families. And the fact that after that, we as a nation got nothing done, zero done in terms of gun control. And I give us as administration an F. When people ask what your successes and failures, I always say that's our biggest failures. We did nothing to keep our kids and our nation safe. This is a made in American problem. There's no other, England, Japan, Australia, Canada, we can go down the list. There's no other nation that has anywhere near the level of gun violence that we have. And so when I was coming out of the administration, I actually thought about taking on this issue, and I just decided that I didn't think I could have impact. I thought it was too far gone. So I shifted, and I'm trying to give guys a reason to have hope and put down the guns.
Yeah.
I thought I couldn't do anything about the easy availability of guns. I'm just trying to give them a reason to not touch them.
Yeah.
I thought I could have impact there. Obviously, we've had a whole series of mass shootings, massacres there every week now in America. It's just sort of become standard. And then Parkland hit.
Yeah.
And I would say when Parkland hit, my instantaneous thought is nothing's going to change again. Like, why is this different? A couple things I didn't realize. These kids have grown up with social media,
Yes.
technology. The kids at Sandy Hook were 5 and 6. They weren't doing that. These kids are smart, sophisticated, were on it. Candidly, they've recognized their privilege and been thoughtful about that. The other thing that's interesting is many of these kids who have emerged as leaders were trained in debate. And so they're used to doing research. They're used to thinking on their feet. They're used to challenging facts. The superintendent there, Bob Runcie's a close friend of mine, worked for me in Chicago. So anyway, right after it, I thought things started to move. And this is really interesting. But this is not a white kids in a gated community issue. This is our kids' voice in Chicago who live with this every single day. They have to be heard. We hire each summer about 1,200 teens in Chicago to create peace programs in their neighborhoods, all kinds of peace projects. We started that last summer. We're going to do it again this summer. So we had some amazing leaders who have been working with sort of the younger group. This is sort of the prevention side. The older guys I'm working with, I call the intervention. So the younger kids, I wanted to just try and have them FaceTime with the kids in Parkland and just start to share stories. And then just give her extraordinary credit. Emma Gonzalez, who's been the leader there, said, no, we don't want to FaceTime. Just have them all come to my house. It was just this unbelievably generous gift. And so we sent 6 of our kids down. This was 2 weeks after the massacre, still unbelievably raw. Just again, the stories are fascinating. For a lot of our kids, it was the first time on a plane. Sure. Our kids didn't know what a gated community was. And they thought maybe their family was in jail or something. They couldn't quite understand that. The first thing they did is they went to the high school. And our kids came back and said, what was different is when someone gets shot in Chicago, they're teddy bears, and unfortunately there's often liquor bottles, and there's candles, and there's T-shirts and balloons, but they're not people. And they went to the high school, and there are lots and lots of people out there. And they said, I know people care. That people care more there than they do about us. But anyway, they went and spent the day with Emma at her house and laughed and cried. And she immediately, our kids were a little bit, are we going to be left out of this? And she just immediately put on, we know you've been living with this. We know there's a real privilege here. And a bunch of our tough kids just started crying. It just took all the tension out of the air. And then 2 weeks later, she and her mom and a couple of the other kids came up and spent time with us. Our kids, 4 of our kids ended up, we took 8 busloads down to the march in D.C. 4 of our kids actually spoke at the march. Our kids went back down last week to spend time. So what you have is this amazing coalition of kids from across the country. The march was just unbelievably powerful. I don't know if anyone, 850,000 people there. Yeah.
That's great.
No one over 21 spoke. And I can't say they're going to win, but they are moving the country in ways that I have never seen. It's just extraordinary. It makes me more hopeful. And I've talked a lot about it. It's actually difficult, but what kids on both sides say is that, obviously so many things not in common, but it's our shared pain makes us family. And I hate that our teens across the country are bonding over this shared pain, but that's very real. And seeing what they're doing together, and we as the old guys are just sort of, gently facilitating, but way in the background, and they are running this, they're leading this, they're doing all kinds of things. And it is remarkable and beyond inspiring to see.
It really is inspiring. It's almost like we need to pass the baton to them. They're going to do a better job.
Because we have failed. Our generation has absolutely failed. Our administration absolutely failed. There's no other way to put it. But for me, this is absolutely a movement, and you look at civil rights movement and other things. Those are led by 17, 18, 19-year-olds saying that enough's enough. And we have failed to protect kids and families in our country, and kids are saying that's not acceptable. And so I don't know if we passed the baton. I think they took the baton.
They took it.
They snatched it. And they needed to because we weren't going anywhere. We were stuck in quicksand, and they are moving this thing, and our job is just to support and cheerlead and facilitate.
And learn.
And learn.
Today it was announced that Harvard had a study on millennials, and it said that poll said that 70%, 70% of millennials wanted stronger gun control. 70%.
For all these issues, it shouldn't be Republican or Democrat or left or right. It should just be, do we want to live without this level of fear? And this has to. I love the march. It was unbelievable. I took my family, my kids, blew them away. But that's got to translate to voter registration. That's got to translate to people voting. Again, across political parties. And the question is, do we value kids? Do we value life more than we value guns? Right. For a long time in our country, we've valued guns more than we have our kids' lives. And it's not about the Second Amendment. It's not about hunting. If you want to hunt deer, hunt geese, hunt turkeys, that's great. You just can't hunt kids. And you don't need AR-15s to hunt deer. Yeah. And
so, Arne, we have a group of some of the best and the brightest, the most privileged in society. We have entrepreneurs, we have affluent fundraisers who are all focused on schooling, learning, education. I've been reflecting, running a technology company. We've been really focused on STEM and ed tech. When I think about these kids that you're describing and the stories that they're telling and how differences seem to melt away despite calcified notions of what's possible with these kids, I wonder if this group has de-emphasized the importance of helping kids build skills to support a democracy. Like, we're talking about math and we're talking about reading and we're talking about other things, but have we lost sight of what's important? This group, us, me.
No, it's a great question. I think we're all, I think rightfully struggling and doing some soul searching, trying to figure out. I guess where I'd net out on that is that for me, these are always false choices, and it's always got to be both and, not either or. So by any measure, we have to do a much better job in terms of math, in terms of technology, in terms of science. You guys know better than I where the jobs of the future are going, and if we're trying to break cycles of poverty and if education be a path to the middle class and upward mobility, we have to emphasize those things. At the same time, again, for me, it's not either or. How do we teach empathy? How do we get people engaged in a civic democracy? And I am, I'm just always honest, I am concerned for our democracy. I'm concerned about the breakdown and the polarization and everything. Social media, TV just pushes everybody to their own camps. And my good friend who did a lot of the president's political work, David Seamus, did some fascinating stuff afterwards where he interviewed people who voted for Barack, and then voted for Trump. And it was not an insignificant number, and just really trying to understand that mentality. He also put in groups of people who were left-leaning from sort of center-left to far-left, and people who were right-leaning from center-right to far-right. It was fascinating. In both those groups, when they got together, they went to their extreme. So the folks on the right went further right, folks on the left went further to the left. So what we have is a collapse of the middle. And how we bring back the middle, how we teach that, how we teach empathy, how we not have everyone just retreat to their corners and to their social media feed. I think that's a huge challenge. It's an emerging thing for folks. Empathy technologies, and that's a little different than math and science, and we need math and science and STEM. But we need to find ways to bring kids together and find some common ground that's not around losing your best friends and shooting, losing family members and shooting. So it's not for me this or that, let's drop STEM now and just do that. But how do we do all of this in a much more thoughtful, intentional way and produce citizens that will keep our country vibrant? The final thing I'll say is this. Compromise has become just a dirty word. And I think that the premise of the democracy, I think, is that you find some common ground that by definition is imperfect to everyone involved, but that's the best that we can do together. But again, on both sides now, not just on the right, we're electing people where if you compromise, that's seen as a sign of weakness, not a sign of strength. And I don't see how democracy works if we're not willing to compromise. I mean, I just think things just start to break down. So it's a long answer to your question. It's not either or, it's both and, but thinking about how we use technology, how we do things virtually to get kids from different communities working together to solve real problems our country desperately needs that. Our democracy desperately needs that.
Well, it's not lost on me when I reflect on your life and I think about some of the things that you're doing. You are very intentional about staying close to the populations, be it the young men in Chicago, bus tours when you were Secretary of Education. You just talked about sending kids down to Parkland. Proximity. I had an opportunity to listen to Brian Stevenson at the Aspen Institute talk about proximity. For those of you who don't know Brian Stevens, I would encourage you to check him out online. And what he said stuck with me to the point, I say it all the time, proximity leads to understanding, and understanding leads to empathy. Without proximity, there's no pathway to empathy. Many of the people in this room do a lot of things for kids. They do a lot of things to kids. I'm not going to ask people to raise their hands, but I'm wondering how many of us in this community do things with the people we serve. How proximate we are. How important is proximity to work that you're talking about?
Well, and I'll just say it's almost a selfish thing, so I don't want to act like it's altruistic. It's the only way I know how to learn. Like I never learned anything sitting behind my desk anywhere in Chicago, in DC. I have a nice office downtown. You don't learn anything doing that. So talk about, we used to do these back-to-school bus tours. We visit schools all over the country, but we do these bus tours, and you would see things in Carrollton, Georgia, and Columbus, New Mexico, that it's just impossible to begin to fathom sitting behind a fancy desk in DC. I go to Cook County Jail every month and recruit guys directly out into our program. And it's not fun. I don't like doing that. But I do that because that's the best place where I learn. Every part of our programming, I test with guys there. And they tell me the truth. This makes sense. This is crazy. This is going to sound really, really crazy, but it's honest truth. I much prefer visiting Cook County Jail than I used to testify before Congress, because it
makes perfect sense.
It is such a more honest conversation, and nobody's playing for the cameras. No one's just playing their spin, and you get real, honest feedback. And so I can't run an effective program. I can't learn and adjust if I'm not hearing from the folks that we're working with. And so you have to do that. And it's probably too much. I had a nightmare last night because I'm going to be in a place tomorrow with some guys that's not the safest, and I'm a little worried about that. But I have to be in those places, and I have to be with those guys if I'm going to try and impact the issue I'm working with. And so if we're not, Brian's just extraordinary. If we're not, all of us, moving outside our comfort zones, if we're not willing to take, whether it's some professional or personal risk and do some things a little bit different, then we're not really addressing, I think, the core, the heart of the issues that we need to deal with. And so for me, it's how I speak. This is how I learn. I learn by talking. I learn by listening. I learn by watching. You learn by being places that feel a little bit different. And it's great to read. It's great to study. It's great to look at the data. But for me, the best learning is always human interaction. It's face to face.
Well, I'm inspired by that notion, and I will confess that when this thing happened at Starbucks, I went on my Slack, and I realized that there are a lot of people of color, in my family on this Slack, and the kinds of conversations that are happening, the frustration, the just exhaustion from it, are different than the conversations in majority. One of the things that struck me about what you said was these kids in Parkland are having those intergenerational, intercultural, they're global citizens, and they're having conversations across barriers that people in my generation maybe aren't having. And one of the things, I know that there's a lot that hasn't gotten better, the amount of segregation in schools, all the things that you said. But one of the things I noted that I saw on the Slack line of, let's call it the diversity Slack channel, was there were a lot of white folk who said, what is happening? Why are you treating these two gentlemen like this in Starbucks? And there's hope in that.
Yeah.
There's hope in that. So it's an outrage for everybody, and people are not happy with it. And if we can take some lessons from some of the kids that you're working with, maybe we'll all get a little more proximate. Yeah. Maybe a lot more good things will happen.
It's interesting. It's interesting for us as white people. Why is this happening? Your family knows it happens every day. Every day, all over. And honestly, that's that was horrific. For me, that's less horrific than young men being shot for being black.
Yeah.
And for, knocking on a door to ask directions to school with a neighbor and getting shot. So unless we're willing to really grapple with, so Starbucks is making a huge effort. Will they change their culture in a 3-hour session? Maybe, maybe not, but again, they're trying. Obviously, this is not a Starbucks issue.
Yeah, right.
This is an American issue, it's a societal issue, and all of us in our own institutions, in our own families, in our own communities, unless we're willing to really, address these things in tough ways, we're not going to get where we need to go. But I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful, and people are trying. They are thinking in different ways, and I think, again, in every crisis there's an opportunity. Our country's struggling, but I think there's an amazing opportunity to do this and leapfrog to a better place together.
Well, we're out of time, Arne, and I just want to thank you for your values-based, inspirational leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.